Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Education Series produced by the Australian Fitness Academy. It's like progressive overload for your brain. I'm your host, Tom Rock, and in today's episode we're going to talk about hydration, salts and electrolytes. And this question comes from Pete, so thanks for getting in touch, Pete, and sending through your question. Very interesting question, and another interesting topic to cover, I think, and it sort of almost bleeds into the sort of the supplement side of things. These sort of hydration salts and electrolytes that are sort of in the market these days. It's sort of becoming more and more prominent, I think. And I think it's a great question. Do we need them? They're sort of marketed towards obviously improved hydration, but improved performance, improved recovery, and these sort of things. So looking at whether you need them is a really, really good question. And are they beneficial? Because supplements can be expensive, and if we're spending money on things that aren't necessarily we're not going to need or aren't going to benefit us, that's not a good thing either. So really good question. Something I sort of haven't really looked too much into, so it's interesting to have a bit of a look. I'll post some of the links to the articles I sort of looked through, but that I sort of had a look at. But it was some interesting takeaways, I think, once I dived into it. So generally, in some of these, I'm sure there's lots of different brands and packets out there. One that I looked at, or a lot of the common ones include sodium, potassium, and magnesium, and that's generally they're sort of the popular minerals that are found within these sort of sachets or these products. And they're necessary for all sorts of things in terms of muscle contraction, relaxation. Sodium's important for water absorption, maintaining fluid balance, and yeah, that regulation of muscle contraction and relaxation comes from a balance of this sodium, potassium, and magnesium is going to be important too. I think it's important to understand what is in the supplements that you take, why they might be necessary, and why you might need more of them if you're going to look at taking these for sort of hydration purposes. And there are instances potentially where they may be beneficial if someone's doing a lot of vigorous or high intensity exercise for a long period of time, or they're sort of working in hot environments and sweating a lot. These sort of minerals and electrolytes, replenishing them is going to help hydration levels. But I think it's important to take a well-rounded view of these minerals, and if we're intaking a sachet of sodium, potassium, and magnesium, is it something that we're actually needing? And I think a lot of the articles that I read, I'll just summarize basically some of what they ended up, or the experts sort of ended up saying, or whoever the article was interviewing, is generally if you're all these minerals, sodium, potassium, and magnesium, we get them from food sources as well. So if we're not, so you've got to have a look at what's your general diet like, and are you getting them in your diet is potentially a good question. So potassium and magnesium, if you're eating green leafy vegetables, nuts, dark chocolate has potassium, magnesium. Um, Grains have magnesium, and bananas, we'll look at later, are a good source of potassium as well. And there's a lot of sodium in generally processed foods, have high amounts of sodium too, so you can generally find sources of sodium. So they sort of summarize it, I guess, people who engage in regular activities or moderate exercise, generally drinking water is enough to stay hydrated. If you're eating sort of a well-balanced diet with fruit, nuts, vegetables, protein, and you're not sort of excessively sweating, you like for a lot of the day, you probably don't need added electrolytes or extra electrolytes to hydrate. You probably just need water. So I think it's just important to understand that not everyone is going to need to add salt to their water. Generally, you potentially will get these added minerals within your balanced diet, and that's absolutely acceptable to do. And then drinking water will provide you that hydration. So yeah, one of the articles sort of put forward a bit of a general guideline that unless your exercise is lasting longer than 75 minutes and it's at high intensity, there's generally no need for electrolyte supplementation. So you'd have to be exercising for more than 75 minutes and at a high intensity, and that would sort of that sweat loss, that exercise, potentially you might get added benefit from electrolyte supplementation. But if it's less than 75 minutes, it's not an extremely hard workout, then really hydration with just plain water is going to give you everything you need. So, and I think that's interesting to sort of summarize like that. You see a lot of marketing, and there's supplement marketing for all different types of supplements, whether it's protein, vitamins, minerals, lots of different things. So it's good to sort of think critically about what you're ingesting and if it's going to add benefit. And I think that, like, if you look at, and this one brand that I looked at in terms of hydration salts and electrolyte sachets, one sachet had 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 210 milligrams of potassium, and 70 milligrams of magnesium. So you can have a look at what's exactly in that packet that you're drinking. And I think it's important to relate it to whole foods and see how what our day is like in terms of, do I get much magnesium and potassium? And if I look at, so the sachet has 210 milligrams of potassium. A banana has around, depending on the size, has around 400 milligrams of potassium. So the sachet has less potassium than a banana. So you're probably getting a lot of potassium. If you're eating fruit and vegetables, you're probably getting that much potassium throughout the day, or that sort of hit of potassium can be got through a banana. And 15 to 20 almonds has around 70 milligrams of magnesium. So the magnesium in that packet can be got through 15 to 20 almonds. So it's not a huge amount of magnesium or potassium that you're generally getting in this packet. A lot of it comes down to that sodium. So you're getting 1,000 milligrams of that sodium. And sodium is an interesting one. If you Google how much sodium I should have, or is there an issue with sodium, it generally comes down to sometimes sort of high blood pressure has sort of been linked to sodium intake. So generally diets high in sodium, if you went to the doctor and you had high blood pressure, they may ask you what your diet is and check what sort of your sodium intake, and you may be sort of recommended to reduce sodium intake. So I think that's an important factor, is putting in perspective what you're eating throughout the day, and do I need this extra 1,000 milligrams of sodium? Is it going to assist? And some of the, like, in terms of how much sodium we should be getting, there's on the Eat for Health government website, you can find that there's a PDF document on sodium that you can sort of find on there, and it says that it has what's called an adequate intake, which is basically an amount of sodium that we would need to function each day, and the adequate intake is 460 to 920 milligrams for adult male and females. So that's the sort of the minimum sodium intake that we would generally want. It does say that this adequate intake probably doesn't apply to highly active individuals, like endurance athletes or those undertaking physical work in hot conditions, or those with large amounts of sweat on a daily basis. They probably need more than the 460 to 920 milligrams. So that's an adequate intake number. They also have another recommendation, which is the suggested daily target, which they've set at 2,000 milligrams a day. This target was designed to give people or individuals a more realistic target that meets the current food supply and food industry. So generally, a daily target of 2,000 milligrams of sodium is potentially what you should aim for the general population. Again, it's going to be individualized, which is important to understand with this. It does also say the average sodium intake in Australia is 3,600 milligrams a day. So it's like 1,600 milligrams more than the daily target. So have a look at your current. If you're eating a lot of processed foods or some processed foods, you're likely getting in a lot of your sodium anyway. So your body is probably getting that sodium throughout the day to help hydration without added salts and electrolytes. So that's important to understand, I think, and see where your sodium is coming from. So sodium is generally it'll be on the nutrition labels in foods, and I think it's important to understand your day's sodium, and if you're aiming for sort of if you're over 2,000, maybe you don't need added electrolyte salts just for a 30-minute run. You're probably getting all the minerals and electrolytes you need in your whole foods. For example, if you go and past KFC and you get a Zinger burger, that's 902 milligrams of sodium just in that burger. So that's almost half your day's worth of sodium in one burger. If you go the Zinger stacker, that's 1,877 milligrams of sodium, Pete. So you've basically got your day's worth of sodium in your Zinger stacker burger. So that's where it's like, depending on what foods you intake and your exercise intensity, and your exercise time, you may be replenishing these electrolytes without the need for these salts. If we're not talking about KFC, we're talking about other sort of whole foods and how they fit in. It's an interesting one. I think sodium's that thing you don't really consider too much, and it's going to be obviously more in the processed foods. But for example, if we have beef tacos for dinner or beef burritos, I just had a quick look at sort of a common meal that is out there, and the taco spice mix comes in a sort of a sachet packet. There's 199 milligrams of sodium per serve though, and the pack actually has 10 serves. So that packet has 1,990 milligrams of sodium, so almost has 2,000 milligrams of sodium just in that packet, which goes with 500 grams of beef. So 500 grams of beef is apparently 10 serves or 10 tacos. So considering serving size and how much you're eating is important. So so while it says 199 milligrams per serve, that's per serve of like 50 grams of beef. If you cook 500 milligrams of beef, add the sachet to 500 milligrams of beef. So you've got to think about how you cook it, or what's the recipe going into, and how many serves am I actually eating of this. So if you look at that, so that's there is actually a salt reduced version which has 1,200 milligrams instead of 1,900 milligrams. So a little bit less salt in that one for the packet, which is probably a good thing. So if you look at that salt in just the taco spice mix, you potentially take on the taco sauce from the jar as well. So that's 20 grams or 1 tablespoon has 180 milligrams of sodium. So 1 tablespoon of taco sauce has 180 milligrams. And if you have the jumbo tortillas, each wrap has 623 milligrams of sodium. So if you have 2 wraps, that's around 500 milligrams. So if you put that meal together, and we're talking about if you're eating 200 grams of beef, 2 tortillas, 1 tablespoon of taco sauce on each wrap, you're probably eating around 1,500 milligrams of sodium just in that meal. And it's generally a healthy meal. You've got beef, if you put on sort of lettuce, carrot, tomato, maybe a little bit of cheese on your wrap, it's generally not too bad. But there is still 1,500 milligrams of sodium. So you're still getting a lot of sodium throughout the day from whole foods, which I think is important to incorporate. Or consider before you look at going, do I need to take a $2 sachet of sodium, potassium, magnesium through my day if I'm eating whole foods regularly? But it's something to sort of consider individual if you're looking at taking any supplements. What is actually in the supplement? Where does this fit in terms of whole foods? And what am I getting on a daily basis? And how much generally do I probably need? And that's quite specific. So if you're looking at this and you're thinking, I want to look at more into nutrition, that's where dietitians and nutritionists come into play. Potentially the PTs and things can give you general advice and pushable whole foods and following a well-balanced diet. And if you're doing that, there's a high probability that you don't need these added salts and electrolytes for hydration. Again, if you're exercising vigorously, or it's very hot weather and you're physically active and you're sweating a lot throughout the day, potentially it's not going to be harmful. And the amount of sodium is definitely going to be individualized. It can relate to how much potassium you're intaking as well. So definitely something not to just run out and do because someone else does it or you've seen it. It's important to take the whole picture of what's in it and why it might be beneficial. But definitely, yeah, the products are out there, and it's always worth sort of asking questions about, I think, to see if it's going to be beneficial, or am I getting everything I need from my healthy, balanced diet. But yeah, Hope you all enjoy my thoughts on those salt and electrolyte sachets. Something to experiment with if you're doing heavily active things, but consider your whole diet and how that plays into what you're ingesting. I think is an important takeaway. But if you've got any questions on that, or you want a bit of a follow-up, guys, feel free to send me an email. Or if you've got any other topics or questions you would like me to cover, send an email to tom@afa.com.au. Definitely happy to cover anything you guys would like me to touch on. But yeah, other than that, guys, have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you all soon.